30 years after the most famous murder in hip-hop history, the last man standing from that white Cadillac is finally sitting in a Las Vegas courtroom, and today a prosecutor played his own voice back to a jury.
I was at 626, it didn't show up. We waited about 15, 20 minutes, they didn't show up. So, if I can show you some liquor, stop in the liquor store, I got all the hands there and jump in the Cadillac.
Every other person who was in that car the night Tupac got shot is dead, and Keith D knew that for decades, which is exactly why he felt comfortable doing interview after interview, writing a whole book about it, basically treating the whole thing like a career. But what he did not count on was that his own words were going to be the entire case against him, and today those words started playing in a courtroom in front of 12 jurors who are now going to decide whether he spends the rest of his life in prison.
Wrong, dude. Jumped on a fucking kid, dude.
In the book, he says, then jumping on my nephew gave us the ultimate green light to do something to their
And what makes this whole story even wilder is that for a few minutes that night, Tupac almost made it out. But further into this video, you're going to find out why the one witness who could have identified the shooter never got the chance to talk, what the man working inside the MGM Grand that night had to do with all of this, and why 28 years later, Keith D was still saying this in private. Let me break the whole situation down for you. To understand September 7, 1996, you gotta understand the 10 square miles it came from. The prosecution explained it this morning, and they were right to start there, because Compton in the mid-90s was not just a city, it was a whole world operating by its own set of rules. About 30 gangs claiming territory in that same small space, and the two that run this entire story are the Mob Piru Bloods and the Southside Compton Crips. Suge Knight grew up in a Compton neighborhood called Looters Park, which was Mob Piru territory, and those ties never left him even when he built one of the most powerful record labels in music history. Death Row Records in the early 90s was dominating the West Coast, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and eventually Tupac on the roster. But the people moving through that operation, the unofficial security, the ones handling situations that did not get documented, a lot of them came straight from the Peru world. That was just how Death Row worked. On the other side of that same 10 miles was a man named Dwayne Keith Davis, who everybody in that world knew as Keith D. And Keith D was not out there in the streets at a low level. He was a shot caller, the head of the Burris Street faction of the Southside Compton Crips. And the way you rise in that world is by bringing money in. Keith D brought in a lot of money. He described his own drug operation in his book as a multi-million-dollar nationwide trafficking business. And from everything the investigation eventually found, that description was not much of an exaggeration.
Basically, you sell drugs to be successful to get up out that shit. Yeah. And to get out the gang and all that shit, so you can provide for your family.
His nephew was Orlando Anderson, who everybody called Baby Lane. Also Southside Crips, also highly respected, and the kind of person where if somebody put their hands on him, it was not just personal, it was a direct challenge to the whole organization. Now, the piece that most people skip over when they tell this story is the third figure, a Harlem hustler named Eric Martin, who went by Zip Martin. Zip was moving product between the coasts. He had built relationships with Compton Crips through years in the drug game, and he was also connected to Diddy's Bad Boy Records world in New York. He was the bridge between two operations that should never have been in the same room together. And the fact that he existed and the fact that Keith D knew him is what turned a gang beef on a Vegas strip into something that went all the way to the top of the East Coast music industry. So here is the part that the prosecution laid out this morning that changes how you look at everything. By the time all of this is happening, Diddy is running Bad Boy Records out of New York, and his artists are the biggest thing on the East Coast. Biggie is his centerpiece with the money flowing in like crazy. But when Bad Boy came to Los Angeles, Diddy had a real problem because he was moving through territory that belonged to Death Row and the Mob Piru Bloods, and the tension between those worlds was already high. So through Zip Martin, Diddy made an arrangement with Keith D. The Southside Compton Crips would provide security and protection whenever Diddy and his people came west. You want to move through LA without death row's people touching you, you go through Keith D's crew. Simple as that. Business arrangement built on mutual interest. What that arrangement did, though, was create a connection between Diddy's money and Keith D's muscle that went beyond just security. And when the East Coast versus West Coast beef escalated to the point where Tupac Shakur was publicly accusing Diddy and Biggie of being involved in a shooting that almost killed him, that connection was about to get activated in a way that nobody could take back. Tupac, in 1995, was locked up at Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York on a assault conviction, and his situation was bad. He was broke, his appeals were failing, the East Coast had turned cold on him, and he was stuck. Suge Knight went and visited him in prison, and the offer was direct. Sign to death row, and death row pays the bail and gets you out. Tupac signed from behind bars, Suge posted the bail, and the moment Tupac walked out of Clinton, he was not just a West Coast rapper anymore, he was in the death row orbit, aligned with Mob Piru, in direct opposition to Bad Boy and everything connected to it. And Tupac did not play it quiet. He came out loud. He went on record saying Diddy and Biggie were connected to the Quad Studio shooting in 1994, where he got hit 5 times in a New York recording studio. He said he had proof. He put it in songs, he called people out by name, and he made it the most public beef in the history of hip-hop up to that point. So by the summer of 1996, you had Death Row and Bad Boy on opposite sides of a war that had real street backing behind it. And at a mall in Compton, the street side of that war made its first physical move. In the summer of 1996, Trayvon Lane, who was a Mob Piru blood affiliated with Death Row, was shopping at the Lakewood Mall, and he was wearing a Death Row medallion chain, a gift from Suge himself, which in that world means it carries the full weight of who gave it to you. Also at Lakewood Mall that day was Orlando Anderson, Keith D's nephew from Southside Crips. A fight broke out between the two groups, and during that fight, the chain got pulled off Trayvon Lane's neck. Now, the prosecution said today that exactly what happened to that chain afterward is disputed. Not everybody agrees on the details, but what mattered was not the chain itself. It was the message that came with taking it. Someone from the South Side had reached out and taken something that belonged to the Death Row camp, and Trayvon Lane was not going to forget that, and neither was anybody he told. That moment at Lakewood Mall was the fuse. September 7, 1996 was when it went off. On September 7, 1996, Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon were fighting for the heavyweight title at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. And basically everybody who mattered in that world was in that city. Death Row had rooms. Sugar had a house in Vegas, and Tupac was invited too. The whole operation came out for the fight. Keith D was also there with his crew. But here's a detail that came out in court today that most people do not know, and that changes the way the whole night reads. When Davis bought his tickets to the fight, he got them through a scalper, which meant when he and his people showed up, they were all scattered across different sections of the arena. They were not sitting together, and Orlando Anderson, his nephew, was sitting somewhere in that building completely by himself with no backup around him. The fight did not last long. Tyson stopped Seldon in under a round, and then the crowd moved out to the lobby and the casino floor. And in that MGM Grand lobby, Trayvon Lane spotted Orlando Anderson standing alone. He pointed him out to Tupac and the Death Row entourage. What happened next has been on camera for decades. Tupac, Suge, and the whole crew ran down on Orlando right there on the casino floor. Multiple people jumping one man on the tile, Tupac himself getting his in, security rushing in trying to break it up. The prosecution put it plainly today. This was not a random fight. This was the Lakewood Mall chain situation finding its resolution. And it was all captured on the MGM's own surveillance system. After the beatdown, MGM security questioned Orlando. They asked if he wanted to press charges. He said no and refused any medical attention. They let him go, and who could have known that this would lead to the biggest tragedy in hip-hop? And we'll get to details, but first let's talk about what we got from the first day of trial. The prosecution walked the jury through the next 2.5 hours. This morning, and this is the part where it gets into territory that the trial itself is now determining. Because what Keith D has said across 15 years of interviews and in his book and in that 2008 recording played in court today is that the moment he heard about Orlando getting jumped, there was never a question in his mind about what was going to happen next. In the world he came from, you do not let that kind of disrespect go unanswered, especially when the person who got jumped is your nephew.
Wrong, dude. Jumped on the fucking kid, dude.
In the book, he says, then jumping on my nephew gave us the ultimate green light to do something to their
Davis ran into Zip Martin that night in Las Vegas. Zip told him he had a gun and could help. Davis went to his Mercedes-Benz and got the gun from Zip Martin, a Glock 40 caliber, and started putting together a response. He organized 2 vehicles to go to Club 662, which was Shoegaze nightclub on the Strip where Tupac was scheduled to perform. And here is the other detail that came out today that changes the picture. Davis was not in the white Cadillac initially. He was in a van. Orlando and the others took the white Cadillac and drove over to 662. They waited outside the club for 15-20 minutes. Tupac and Sugar never showed. Davis said it in his own audio played in court this morning. Straight up. They waited, nobody came, so they left.
I was at 626, they didn't show up. We waited about 15-20 minutes, they didn't show up. So, if I could show you some liquor, shop at the liquor store, I got on the hand, they had to jump in the Cadillac.
In that recording, Keith mispronounced the club name, but it doesn't change the context, and this is the part that is almost too strange to believe. When they left 662, the plan had changed. According to Davis's own account, they were going to go get some liquor, go back to the Strip, and just party. Go back to what the night was supposed to be before Orlando got stomped at the MGM. Davis got out of the van and moved into the white Cadillac. 4 people in that car now. Davis in the front passenger seat with a Glock. A man named Terrence Brown, who they called Bubble Up, behind the wheel. And in the back seat, DeAndre Smith, who went by Big Dre, and Orlando Anderson. They were heading back to the Strip, and on the way, they spotted a caravan of cars moving through the night on Flamingo Road. That caravan included Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight in a black BMW. Heading east toward Club 662, multiple death row vehicles behind them. Davis made a decision right there on the spot. They made a U-turn, they came back around, and they caught up to Tupac's car at a red light at Flamingo and Cobalt. Davis had the Glock in the front passenger seat. He said in his own accounts multiple times that if Tupac and Suge had been on his side of the car, he would have shot them himself. But the BMW was positioned so they were on the right side, the passenger side, which was the opposite side from Davis in the front seat of the Cadillac. So he passed the Glock to the back seat. DeAndre Smith did not want to shoot. Orlando Anderson, with anger boiling inside him from the incident, took the gun.
So you handed the gun to the back seat?
Yeah.
You hear my name?
I needed Dre, like, oh, and my name, like, dude.
4 shots hit Tupac. Suge took a fragment to the head and caught glass in the neck. The BMW kept going. Suge made a U-turn, drove the car west on Flamingo, and it finally came to a stop on Las Vegas Boulevard at Harmon, right on the Strip. 2 tires blown out from going over a curb. Now there was also a car of women right there at that same red light when everything went off. And one of them, a woman named Ingrid Stokes, took the stand today for the first time publicly and testified about what she saw. Her and 3 friends were in a rented convertible Sebring, top down, parked slightly in front of Suge's BMW at the light because one of her friends, Lauren, had been talking to Suge and they had been told to follow the convoy to the club. Stokes and the driver were literally switching seats, both of them crouched down in the car mid-switch when the shots rang out. She said she looked up and saw the white 4-door Cadillac in the turning lane. She almost hit it trying to flee. She turned right on Cobalt and drove fast down the first street she could find.
When we pulled up on the side of him and she was talking to Suge, he was relaxed, like sitting in the sitting in the passenger seat, and Suge was relaxed talking to Lauren. Nothing, like there was no engagement.
She also said something today that matters for the story beyond just what she witnessed. When they went back to the scene to see if they could help, police made her and her friend sit on the sidewalk curb in public like they were suspects in front of traffic still moving on the Strip. She said that experience made everybody in her car shut down and stop cooperating. And when the prosecutor asked her why people from that world do not come forward, she said it's simple. Snitches get ditches.
Snitches get ditches. I'm saying, not the coolest, but yeah, talking to police is not a thing we do in our culture anywhere in LA.
The bike patrol officer who had stopped Tupac's BMW for a missing license plate earlier that same night. A man named Gary Dale was one of the first on the scene at Harmon. He rode in the ambulance with Tupac to UMC and tried to get him to say who did it. Tupac kept saying the same thing a couple of times, just, "We will take care of it," and then nothing more. Tupac Shakur died at University Medical Center of Southern Nevada 6 days later on September 13, 1996. He was 25 years old. Within 24 hours of the murder, everyone who had been in that white Cadillac was back in Compton. They stayed the night and drove home the next morning like nothing happened. And while the rest of the world was focused on Las Vegas, what happened in Compton over the next 10 days was a bloodbath that almost nobody on the outside heard about. 3 people killed, several others shot, and the detail that the prosecution brought up today that should have been national news at the time but was not. An 11-year-old girl got shot in the violence that erupted after Tupac was killed, and not one of those cases was ever prosecuted, because in that world, silence was survival, and everybody understood what talking cost. Now let me tell you the piece of this that goes way beyond a street beef and a retaliation, because what P.DIDDY told federal investigators in that 2008 session is that the night of September 7th was not purely about avenging Orlando's beating at the MGM. According to Davis, there was already a conversation in place before that night even happened. Davis said he sat down with Diddy, and according to Davis, Diddy told him directly that he had 2 problems that needed to be handled. Those problems being Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. He needed both of them gone, and the number Diddy supposedly put on it was $1 million. The money was supposed to come through Zip Martin. After the murder, Davis kept asking Zip where the payment was. Zip told him Diddy had not paid yet. An associate of Davis's ran into Diddy at a Snoop Dogg party and got a phone number to call. Davis called it multiple times. Nobody ever answered. The $1 million by Davis's account never came through. Now I need to be straight with y'all about what this actually is and is not. Diddy has denied every piece of this story completely and has done so repeatedly. He called it nonsense on The Breakfast Club in 2016. He has never been charged with anything related to Tupac's murder. Las Vegas police have publicly stated he was never considered a suspect in their investigation, and Diddy is currently serving time on completely separate charges that have nothing to do with any of this. What the jury heard today was what Keith D said in a room in 2008 on a recording. Whether Davis was being truthful, whether he was exaggerating his own importance, or whether he had other reasons for framing it the way he did. That is exactly what the next 6 weeks of testimony is going to be wrestling with. Gene Deal, who was Diddy's bodyguard at the time, is on the witness list. Whether that testimony goes anywhere is something we are going to have to see. And here is the piece of this whole story that I think about the most, because it never stops being what it is. On the night of September 7th, Tupac was not alone on that strip. Death Row had a full convoy of cars behind his BMW. And in one of those cars was a 19-year-old rapper named Yafel Fula, who everybody called Yaki Gaddafi, founding member of the Outlaws. He and Tupac were tight from way back, practically god brothers. He was in the car directly behind Tupac when the Cadillac pulled up alongside and the shots went off. And when police started interviewing witnesses after the murder, basically everybody went quiet. You already know why. But Yafel Fula told investigators he could identify the shooter, said he could pick the person out of a photo lineup. Detective Becker confirmed in court today that out of everybody who was in that convoy and stuck around at the scene after the shooting, Frank Alexander, Malcolm Greenidge, Katari Cox, and Yafel was the only one who thought he could make an identification. The others told police they saw a black arm coming out of the car and not much more. Police tried to set up the photo lineups. They kept going through Death Row's attorneys, through David Kenner's office, trying to get access to Yafel so they could get him in front of those lineups. They kept getting to run around. Every attempt, every call, every arrangement, something came up. On November 10th, 1996, exactly 2 months after Tupac died, Yafel Fula was found shot in the head in the stairwell of a housing project in Orange, New Jersey. He was 19 years old. Orange police eventually arrested 2 juvenile suspects and said publicly they did not believe his murder was connected to Tupac's case. And maybe that is true, but the only witness who said he could make an ID on the shooter died with a bullet in his head before he ever sat down in front of a photo lineup. And that fact is never never going to leave this story no matter what those orange detectives said. Detective Brent Becker was the homicide detective who caught the case. Got woken up at 12:30 in the morning on September 8th and was at the scene by 1 a.m. His partner Mike Franks went to UMC. What they had to work with was a handful of cartridge cases on the corner of Flamingo and Cobalt, .40 caliber, determined by the firearms examiner to have come from a Glock, and witness descriptions of a white Cadillac with somewhere between 2 and 4 black men inside heading south on Cobalt after the shooting. That was it for physical evidence. When Compton PD came down and saw the MGM lobby tape, they recognized Orlando Anderson immediately, like they knew exactly who he was the second they saw him. That is when his name officially entered the investigation. And Compton also identified several other people in the tape by their street names, including Trayvon Lane and a few others. But here's where the investigation starts developing problems that will follow it for the next 30 years. Reggie Wright Sr. was a lieutenant with Compton PD running the gang investigations unit. His son, Reggie Wright Jr., was the head of security for Death Row Records, the same death row security operation that was in Las Vegas that night. Becker testified in court today that he simply did not trust Compton PD because of that direct conflict. He watched their detectives conduct interviews in ways he was not comfortable with, and eventually his instinct was proven right because Compton PD was shut down entirely in September of 2000 due to corruption, and the LA County Sheriff's Department came in and absorbed what was left of it. And then LAPD called Becker and told him they had found the murder weapon. He flew out to Los Angeles, collected the gun, had it tested by the firearms examiner. Then LAPD called him back and told him they had given him a fake gun on purpose to see if Becker could be trusted not to leak sensitive information. That is what was happening between the agencies working the most high-profile murder in music history. They were testing each other with fake evidence while the actual case was going cold and witnesses were dying. Metro was also dealing with internal leaks from within their own department. People were accessing the Tupac murder file without authorization. Somebody brought a Polaroid camera into the autopsy room, and later a photo of Tupac's body showed up in a published book. Becker started locking his case files in his own desk, put some reports on floppy disks to keep them from walking off. They eventually changed the case number entirely, just to make it harder for unauthorized people to find the file. A name that came up through the investigation was David Keith, a man connected to Keith D who had worked at the MGM Grand. His photo went into the lineup. Kevin Davis, who appeared to be Keith D's brother or close relative, also appeared in those lineups, and investigators later found a .40 caliber Glock on Kevin Davis. They tested it, not the murder weapon. And here is something that Becker confirmed today that is crucial for understanding the defense's argument. Not one single witness identified any of the alleged Cadillac occupants in any of the 10 photo lineups that were built during the investigation. Not Keith D, not Terrence Brown, not DeAndre Smith. Nobody picked anybody. 30 years of investigation and 0 photographic identifications of a single suspect. When Detective Long took over the case in 2002 and worked it for the next 15 years, the leads had already been cold for a long time, and the witnesses had gone further into silence. And when Greg Kading, the federal agent who ran the 2008 secret session with Davis, retired and published a book in 2011 that contained Davis's confession, the whole secret arrangement unraveled publicly. The defense said today that Kading walked out of law enforcement with the actual case files when he left. They also said he was found by a judge to have manipulated witnesses during his time at LAPD, which led to cases being overturned. And this is the part that makes this case genuinely unlike anything you have seen in a criminal court, because with every other person who had been in that Cadillac dead and no living co-defendant who could place him at the scene, Keith D had every reason in the world to just stay quiet, and instead he decided to make a whole career out of telling the story. It starts with that 2008 session. Davis was caught up in a drug trafficking sting through a CI and an undercover operation. The federal task force hauled him in, and he flipped the whole thing around. Told them he had no useful information about what they were actually investigating, which was Biggie's murder and possible LAPD involvement. But then he said he could tell them about Tupac, and he went into that room and laid out the whole sequence. The MGM, the van, the Cadillac, Zip Martin's gun, the U-turn, Orlando shooting from the backseat, and the Diddy bounty. All of it on tape. In a room with FBI, DEA, LAPD detectives, and a United States attorney, under what he believed was a proffer agreement. And then nobody charged him. Nobody even told Las Vegas Metro that the session had happened. Detective Long, who was actively working the Tupac case for Metro at that time, did not find out about the 2008 interview until years later. The FBI, the LAPD, the U.S. attorney, all in that room, and not one of them picked up the phone and called Metro. Then Kading published his book in 2011 and put Davis's confession in print. And Davis, furious that his story was out there and someone else was profiting from it, decided to go public himself. He said it straight on the 2017 BET Death Row Chronicles interview, and the prosecution played it today in that courtroom.
I got in the car with Holmes, yeah. We ran into them. We went up to the light on Sunset and Flamingo, and dude was acting like he was in a parade or something. And that BMW hanging out the window, hit that corner. Gave a little chase, boom, boom, boom.
And from there, it just kept going. Book in 2019, Compton Street Legend, where he described in detail passing the gun to the back seat, the U-turn, watching Orlando shoot, Vlad TV interviews, podcasts. Every time somebody pointed a camera at this man, he had more to say, and the anger never left him, not even privately. In 2024, a recorded phone conversation between Davis and his own son was played in court today, 28 years after the murder, and Davis was still talking about Tupac, still furious, still unable to let it go. The prosecution ended their opening with that clip this morning because their argument to the jury is this: a man who is still that angry about something 28 years later, privately, when no cameras are on him, when there is nothing to sell and no audience to perform for, is not a man who made up a story to move books. That is a man who actually did what he said he did. In July 2023, Las Vegas Metro Police served a search warrant on the Henderson, Nevada home of Davis's wife, Paula Clemens. They were looking for anything connecting him to Tupac's murder. They came out with computers, phones, hard drives, 2 tubs of photographs, a copy of his own book, a Vibe magazine with Tupac on the cover, and several .40 caliber bullets. On September 29th, 2023, Keith D was arrested while taking a morning walk near his home. No dramatic raid, no standoff, just officers walking up to a 63-year-old man out for a stroll and telling him it was time. Body cam footage from that morning caught a detective asking Davis what he was being brought in for. Davis, already in handcuffs in the back seat of the police car, said he was being arrested for the biggest case in Las Vegas history. He already knew exactly what it was. He rejected a plea deal before trial started. He has been in the Clark County Detention Center without bail since that morning. He told a reporter he did not do anything and he is taking his chances with the jury. Opening statements this morning, August 17th, 2026, 30 years and 10 days after the shooting on Flamingo Road. The prosecution called it an act of revenge from the moment it started. Walked the jury through the whole sequence from the MGM to Flamingo and Cobalt, and then let Davis's own words do the work. They played the 2008 audio. They read from the book. They played the 2024 phone call with his son. And because Davis also came up as a suspect in Biggie Smalls' murder back in 1997, they played a recording of Davis voluntarily sitting down with LAPD detectives that same year, calmly telling them he was in a green Oldsmobile rental car the night Biggie was shot outside the Peterson Museum, that he was on the first level of the parking structure, that he heard people saying Biggie got shot and just went home.
When you got shot, I was up under the parking garage where I was out in there with my car.
The judge told the jury before that recording played that neither the court nor law enforcement currently believed Davis was involved in Biggie's murder. So they heard it not as an accusation, but as context for who they are dealing with. A man who knew how to present himself to investigators. A man who had practice at it. The defense came back with one central argument that they are going to ride for the next 6 weeks. There is no physical evidence placing Keith D in Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996. No confirmed murder weapon, no DNA, no fingerprints. Not one witness identified Davis or anyone else from that Cadillac in any of the 30-year investigation's photo lineups. And while Suge Knight has a physical ticket stub from the Tyson-Selden fight proving he was there that night, Davis, who wrote in his own book that he was sitting in the second row with celebrities dressed in his finest, has not produced a single receipt, credit card transaction, photograph, or any other piece of physical evidence that he was anywhere in Las Vegas that night. The defense also went hard at the detective who led the final phase of the investigation, a man called Detective Mogg, who took over the case in 2017 and held it until he retired in 2023. His testimony is coming in the next few weeks. But the defense told the jury today that this man worked the Tupac murder case for 6 full years and never wrote a single police report. He retired, became a paid independent contractor for the district attorney's office, kept working the same case he had been working as a detective, and billed against the file after retirement. The report he eventually produced was handed to the defense only 5 weeks before this trial started. The defense called his work biased, sloppy, and incomplete, and said he never investigated any of the alternative theories that exist about what happened that night. And then there is the Reggie Wright Jr. angle, which the defense is pushing hard. Wright was the head of death row security. His father ran the Compton PD gang unit, and on the night of the shooting, according to the defense, Wright ordered his own security team to show up in Las Vegas unarmed. The people responsible for protecting Suge Knight and the death row entourage were told not to carry firearms. And when the shooting happened, Reggie Wright Jr. was not with the convoy. He was at Club 662, waiting for Suge to arrive. After Suge went to prison for violating his California probation because of his involvement in the MGM lobby fight, Reggie Wright Jr. stepped in and took over Death Row Records. The defense is asking the jury to look at all of that and ask who actually had something to gain. Wright came out publicly before trial and said Davis is a habitual liar, that all 3 of Davis's own previous defense attorneys had used that exact phrase about their client, and that he is coming to testify as a prosecution witness. He said he is going to deal with it because he believes in justice for Tupac.
Even his own attorney said he's a pathological liar, right?
So this is where we are at the end of day 1. Keith D spent 15 years telling anybody who would listen exactly what he did on September 7th, 1996. He said it secretly to federal agents in 2008. He said it on cable television in 2017. He said it in a book he published and sold in 2019. He said it in interview after interview after interview. And 28 years later, he was still saying it in a private phone call with his own son, captured on a recording that was played for a Las Vegas jury this morning. And now he is in that same courtroom saying every single word of it was fiction, that the book was embellished by his co-author, that the interviews were a performance, that he was not even in Las Vegas that night. His alleged co-defendants are all dead. The only witness who said he could identify the shooter died 2 months after Tupac in a New Jersey stairwell. The man allegedly behind the financial side of the hit is behind bars for other reasons and is not coming to testify. And Suge Knight, who was sitting right next to Tupac when the shots came through the window, has refused to cooperate with any law enforcement investigation for 30 years and is not changing that now. Over the next 6 weeks, people who have never spoken publicly about any of this are going to be on a witness stand under oath. Things are going to come out that have been sitting in the dark since 1996. We are going to be right here when they do. If you stuck until the end, you will probably also want to see these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.